Week 7. The 7th week began with wind again. Not the violent storm of earlier weeks, but a steady, uneasy gale that kept the sails taut and the sea in constant motion. The ship creaked as it moved forward, each wooden joint sounding a little more tired than the week before. For the O'Sullivan family, time no longer felt divided into days. It had become something flatter. A long, unbroken stretch of endurance. Mary still moved slowly through each hour, as though she might wake from a dream that refused to end. She spoke little, ate less. She held the empty space beside her, as if expecting a weight that would never return. Brandon and Sean had stopped asking questions altogether. They had learned in their own way that some questions had no answers worth hearing. Michael kept watch over all of them, but even he had begun to feel something new beneath the exhaustion, a sense not just of grief, but of distance from everything that once defined them. It was just after midday when the sailor in the crow's nest shouted down, "Ship off the port bow!" At first there was nothing unusual in the announcement. Ships sometimes crossed paths in the Atlantic. It was rare, but not unheard of. But as the vessel came into view, a quiet unease spread across the deck. The ship was listing badly to one side. Her sails were torn, her masts damaged. Even from a distance it was clear she had been through a storm far worse than their own, and she was in trouble. Serious trouble. The captain ordered a course adjustment immediately, but even before the helm responded, it was obvious that nothing could be done. As they drew nearer, the truth became impossible to ignore. The other vessel was sinking, slowly but unmistakably. People crowded her decks, tiny figures against the vast grey ocean. Some were waving, some had already begun lowering what lifeboats they had, but there were too many. Far too many. A distress signal flag fluttered weakly from the mast, half torn away by the wind. A gun fired once into the air, a desperate signal, a plea. On Michael's ship, movement erupted across the deck. Men shouted, sailors pointed, passengers climbed as high as they were allowed, straining to see. For a brief moment, hope flickered among them all. Another ship meant rescue. Extra space. Possibly even relief for the overcrowded hold. But that hope lasted only seconds. The captain's voice cut through the confusion. "No boarding." The words were firm, final. A sailor nearby tried to protest. "They'll die out there." The captain did not look away from the sinking vessel. "So will we," he replied quietly, "if we try to take them all." It was not cruelty, it was arithmetic. The emigrant ship was already dangerously overloaded. Every spare inch of space below deck was occupied, every barrel of water accounted for, every ration measured. To take on another ship's passengers would not save lives, it would risk all of them. The ocean did not forgive overreach. Mary stood beside Michael, her face pale as she watched the distant ship struggle. She did not speak, she could not. After everything she had lost, she seemed unable to find words for anything that did not involve her own family. Brandon gripped the railing tightly. "Can't we throw something over?" he asked. "Make room?" Michael shook his head slowly. "There's nothing to throw." Sean stared at the sinking vessel without blinking. He didn't fully understand what he was seeing, but he understood enough. The two ships were now close enough that the sounds carried across the water. Cries, shouts, the breaking of timber, the panicked calls of sailors attempting to organize lifeboats that could never hold enough people. The sea between them seemed small now, deceptively small, as though only a few minutes' effort separated rescue from disaster. But no ship turned, no lifeline was thrown, no boats crossed the gap. There was only the Atlantic and its rules. One lifeboat finally capsized as it hit the water, too heavily loaded. From Michael's ship there was a collective gasp. Figures were thrown into the sea. Some disappeared immediately, others fought to stay afloat, but the waves were already rising higher, the wind was pushing harder, and the distance between survival and death grew wider with every passing second. Mary turned away. "I can't watch," she whispered. But Michael could not look away, not because he wanted to, but because something in him refused to accept that what was happening was real. Minutes stretched, then hours felt as though they had passed in a matter of moments. The sinking ship grew lower in the water, her stern lifting slightly as the bow disappeared beneath the waves. People still clung to the rigging, still waited, still hoped. Some knelt, some prayed, some simply stared at the ocean as though it might change its mind, but the ocean never did. Eventually there was a final shift, a deep, slow movement as the ship reached the point of no return. The stern rose one last time towards the sky, and for a brief moment the entire vessel seemed suspended between worlds. Then it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a terrible finality that seemed to silence even the wind itself. The ship slid beneath the surface of the Atlantic, taking everything with her. The sails, the timber, the voices, the people. Gone. On Michael's ship, no one spoke for a long time. Even the sailors stood still. The captain gave no order. There was nothing left to do. The sea had already decided. Brandon leaned against his father. Are they all gone? Michael nodded slowly. Yes. Sean swallowed hard. Even the children? Michael did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was quiet. Yes. Mary closed her eyes, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. That evening the wind shifted again as though nothing had happened at all. The ship continued westward, sails filled, timbers creaked. Life resumed its routines with disturbing ease. Food was served, water rationed, watches changed. The Atlantic, vast and indifferent, offered no memory of what it had just taken. But for those who had seen it, something had changed. The ocean was no longer simply distance. It was decision, and it did not always choose survival. As the 7th week came to an end, Michael stood alone at the rail, long after sunset. He thought of the other ship, of the people who had believed, even in their final moments, that help might come. He thought of how quickly hope could vanish when there was nowhere left for it to go. Beside him, his family slept in the overcrowded hold. Ahead of him lay more weeks at sea. But for the first time since leaving Ireland, Michael understood something he had not understood before. They were not just travelling across an ocean. They were travelling inside it. And the ocean didn't care who reached the far side. Week 8. The 8th week began beneath skies of brilliant blue. It seemed almost offensive. After everything the passengers had endured, the Atlantic had chosen beauty. The sea rolled gently beneath the hull, sunlight dancing across the water as though nothing terrible had ever happened there. Only a week had passed since they had watched another emigrant ship disappear beneath the waves, and no one spoke of it any more. No one needed to. The memory had settled over the passengers like a second ocean, one they carried within themselves. Michael noticed that the hold had become quieter still, not because fewer people remained, but because those who remained had begun to withdraw into themselves. Even the children played less. Laughter had become a sound so rare. When Sean smiled at something Brandon whispered one afternoon, several nearby passengers turned instinctively towards them, as though trying to remember where such a sound came from. Mary had changed too. She still mourned little Mary Jr., but her grief had become quieter. She no longer cried. Instead, she spent long periods simply staring at the small space where her daughter had slept. Sometimes Michael caught her absent-mindedly smoothing the blanket that no longer covered anyone. He never mentioned it. He simply sat beside her. Sometimes silence was the closest thing to comfort. Among the passengers was a couple from Tralee, whom the O'Sullivans had come to know well, Patrick and Ellen Carney. Patrick had been a blacksmith, strong as an ox when they first boarded. He had entertained Brandon and Sean by bending old nails into tiny horses and birds whenever scraps of metal could be found. Ellen had shared recipes from home describing stews and fresh soda bread so vividly that hungry passengers almost believed they could smell them. They had no children. Their first two had died during the famine, before they ever reached the ship. Michael often found Patrick sitting beside him on the deck. Neither man spoke much. The company itself was enough. But since witnessing the sinking of the other emigrant vessel, something had changed in Patrick. He rarely left his berth. He ate little. When spoken to, he answered politely, but with a strange distance in his voice. His eyes no longer seemed fixed on the world around him. They were always somewhere beyond it. One evening, Michael sat beside him. "You've hardly touched your supper." Patrick shrugged. "I'm not hungry." "You need your strength." Patrick looked out across the sea. "For what?" Michael searched for an answer. America, work, a new beginning. He had said those words countless times since leaving Ireland. Now they sounded hollow, even to him. Later that night, Ellen found Mary sitting quietly beneath the open hatch. "I don't know how to reach him anymore," she whispered. Mary took her hand. "He's grieving." We both are. No. Ellen shook her head slowly. I'm grieving for what we've lost. She looked towards the berth where Patrick lay facing the wall. I think he's grieving for what he believes we'll never have again. Mary understood. Hope could disappear long before life did. The sheep's priest had noticed it too. Over the following days he spent more time simply walking among the passengers. He prayed when asked, listened when invited. Sometimes he merely sat beside someone for an hour without saying a single word. Even those who doubted their faith welcomed his presence. Loneliness had become another illness aboard the ship, one that spread without fever. On Thursday morning, Michael found Patrick standing alone at the stern before sunrise. The ocean was calm, almost perfectly still. You couldn't sleep either? Michael asked. Patrick smiled faintly. I've done little else these past weeks. And the two men leaned against the rail. After a long silence, Patrick spoke. Do you ever think about those people we watched sink? Michael nodded. Every day. I keep wondering why we're still here. Michael looked at him carefully. We're fortunate. Patrick gave a tired laugh. Are we? He turned away before Michael could answer. Something in the exchange unsettled him. He considered following Patrick below, but instead he convinced himself that the man simply needed time. It was a decision he would remember for the rest of his life. Friday passed quietly. The sea remained calm, the wind steady. The passengers moved through their routines almost mechanically. Breakfast, water, the surgeon's rounds, prayer, sleep. No one noticed Patrick missing until late afternoon. Ellen thought he had gone on deck. The sailors thought he had gone below. Then someone found his cap folded neatly beside the stern rail. The captain ordered an immediate search. Every corner of the ship was checked. The cargo spaces, the galley, the forecastle, nothing. The sea yielded no answer, only silence. No one had seen him fall. No one had heard a cry, yet everyone understood. Ellen didn't scream. She simply looked at the empty rail, then quietly sat upon the deck. I knew, she whispered. I knew he was slipping away from me. Mary wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Neither woman spoke again for a very long time. The following day, grief claimed another soul. Mrs. Byrne, a widow in her 60s who had occupied a berth only a few feet from the O'Sullivans since the voyage began, had lost her husband before leaving Ireland and 2 grown sons during the famine. She had often spoken of meeting a daughter who had emigrated years earlier. It was hope that had carried her aboard. But after Patrick's disappearance, she became withdrawn. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped leaving her berth except to sit quietly on deck, staring westward. Just after sunset, Brandon noticed her standing alone near the bow. He thought she was watching the dolphins that occasionally accompanied the ship. A sailor called out to her. She didn't respond. By the time anyone reached her, she had already climbed the rail. Several passengers shouted. A sailor lunged forward. Mrs. Byrne looked back only once. I've buried everyone I ever loved, she said softly. I've nothing left to carry ashore. Then she let go. The ocean closed over her almost immediately. Ropes were thrown. A lifebuoy struck the water. The captain instinctively ordered the helm over. But within moments, he countermanded the order. The ship could not safely turn in fading light and rising seas without placing everyone aboard at risk. The lookout strained his eyes into the gathering darkness. Nothing. The Atlantic had claimed another life. That night the passengers gathered on deck without being summoned. No prayers had been arranged. No speeches prepared. People simply stood together. Some cried openly. Others stared silently into the darkness where the sea and sky had become one. The priest spoke only a single sentence. This voyage has asked more of us than any human heart should ever have to give. No one disagreed. Later, Michael tucked Brandon and Sean beneath their blanket. Sean looked up at him. Did the sea take them? Michael thought carefully. No, he said at last. The sea was only where they died. Sean frowned. Then what took them? Michael looked around the crowded hold at the hunger, the sickness, the exhaustion, the empty spaces left by those already gone. Finally, he answered with quiet sorrow. I think despair did. Sean was too young to understand the word. Brandon wasn't. He lay awake long after everyone else had fallen asleep, listening to the ocean beyond the hull, wondering how something so beautiful could hold so much sadness. As the 8th week came to an end, the ship sailed onward beneath a sky brilliant with stars. Behind her lay Ireland. Ahead lay America. Between them floated a vessel carrying fewer passengers than when she had departed, and hearts far heavier than any cargo she had ever been built to bear.